You are listening to Autistic Stuff for Autistic People, a podcast in which a few autistic friends talk about their lived experiences and special interests. We are here to invite you into our world as autistic peers, sharing relatable conversations about life as autistic people. This podcast is for autistic people and anyone that lives with, works with, or loves an autistic person. I am Aradia. I am the creatively autistic coach and also the podcast producer for Fox and Draven Media.
And I am Cheryl, a holistic empowerment coach who works with other late discovered autistic women and non-binary people, as well as autistic spiritual abuse survivors.
And I'm Patrice. I'm an internal family systems informed practitioner, and I help autistic women and members of the Irish diaspora.
Welcome back to another episode of Autistic Stuff for Autistic People. Today we are going to talk about community, not the TV show, but the concept of a community. Specifically, what is community? Historically and in the present, what defines a community? Why are communities important for our existence as human animals? And why do we resist joining them anyway? What makes a community harmful or helpful? And finally, does a community have to last a long time to be considered successful? This episode's purpose falls into the joy and community category of our podcast. I think as the first dedicated episode of this leg of the podcast tripod. And frankly, that feels overdue. The very existence of this podcast, of our coaching collective, and of our broader coaching work is born out of the quest for community. So with that, I want to open up the floor to my fellow co-hosts and ask them about their histories with communities.
This is a great question, and it's been on my mind lately quite a bit. I just completed a class this weekend. I'm a body talk practitioner, and I was taking a class all weekend, sharing this space with other people who are interested in understanding more about our bodies and our subconscious, and how to listen to the messages of the body. And it's such a powerful thing to be in a space with other people who are passionate about similar things, who have had similar, journeys. And even if the journeys were different, we've all arrived in the same place. And, feeling like I didn't have to explain myself, feeling like I didn't have to justify an interest or a passion was really powerful. And I think that is really similar to my journey within the autism community, right? Finding out I was autistic at the age of 40, I don't know that I said the words, I must find a community, but there was this sense of, I need to find other people. I need to find other people who are on this path with me. I need to find other people who, and just really empathize and identify with. And even though those were largely online communities, I honestly feel more connected with my online communities than many in real life. And I think that's a really important distinction that, we get, for me anyways, I got taught for a long time, oh, online communities, they're not real. And couldn't be farther from the truth for me, right? It's the ones that are in real life where, it almost feels forced. Oh, I'm going to go meet with these people and we have nothing really in common, but, I guess because we work together, it's enough. But it's not. Right? It's having that shared interest, that shared background, that shared passion, or that shared journey that really, for me, is that core part of community that holds it all together. And, growing up in a really high control religious environment, my history of community wasn't necessarily the healthiest. So I'm going to let everyone else share their experiences and we can circle back around to that. Sometimes the harmful elements of community as opposed to what really to look for in a community.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I appreciate you talking about the value of online communities. I've found, especially since learning about autism, I gravitate towards online communities, and it's given me a lot of understanding why I struggled so much in many in-person communities in my 20s and 30s. I found community through going to yoga classes, through surfing, and I was often attending 12-step meetings for families of alcoholics called Al-Anon. Now, all these communities, to some extent, were really helpful and fed me, but looking back, going to the Al-Anon meetings, it was really hard on my system. Now I understand about autism. and hyper empathy. I could feel the pain of everyone in the room. And often we were going into these meetings in like church basements or something. The overhead lighting was really hurting me, and I didn't have a context for it then. Similarly with surfing, super fun, but wow, does it take a lot of spoons to load all that gear, to put on a wetsuit, the wetness, the wet hair, like people in the lineup, like people darting in front of you, taking waves. It was just so overwhelming to my system. And then yoga too, like if you have a crowded class, you've got bodies all around you and the smells and so overwhelming. So now my communities do, for the most part, take place online. And, similar to what you said about body talk, Cheryl, when I've taken courses in internal family systems, it's been so wonderful to be basically speaking the same language as other people, but from the comfort of my own home where no one's energy is affecting me so much. Or when we've had autism groups, we've met in an autism group training, and that's been a wonderful experience. People focused on learning about something I'm interested in is a great way to feel kind of that coherence and a feeling of I'm not alone here anymore. There's people like me, and I can learn from them and they learn from me, and it really builds a sense of my own value and belonging. So I'll leave it at that. Yeah, thanks.
I'm nodding so much to everything you're both saying because, yeah, I have gotten almost all of my most intense personal communities at this point have been online. Like whether it was doing an intensive weekend therapy course with people and just really intensely bonding with them over a few days, or, joining a long-term podcast community and all of that. Like either way, very few of my in-person communities have been as profoundly impactful on me as my online communities. And yeah, Cheryl, I did not come from a high control religious environment, but I did come from a high control technophobe environment. The larger community I was raised in was very like, oh my God, there's a computer. We need to freak out. Like my parents specifically were pretty pro technology, but the larger community around them, their peer group was very like, ew, you let your kids be near a computer? Wow, bold. So like the idea of getting community from online has also been a very big like mental hurdle for me of like, oh, well, it's just online. That's not real. But also like, it is empirically very, very real. And yeah, the thing where you can find people who are fellow travelers on your particular path, which like, yeah, physical proximity doesn't mean that you have the same special interests, but being on the same forums, probably you do have the same special interests because it's like much more self-sorting. And yeah, being in physical spaces is such a big boundary to me to being in community because it's like, I live rurally. So you're telling me I need to go through all the shenanigans of a long car ride both ways, and I have to have all the energy for the event in between those two car rides. And that is like so hard. I mean, to say nothing of like all the other issues with physical spaces. I will say one of my communities, my big community of Wheel of Time people online, we do an annual get together and we go through so many steps to make the physical get together as low stress as possible because half of us acknowledge that we're neurodivergent and the other half are very happy to be with people who make such a comfortable environment, whether or not they call themselves neurodivergent. They're like, wow, scent-free spaces are cool and having a quiet room was nice, little things like that. But that's all born from our affinity online, talking about stuff and planning the event beforehand and saying, ooh, we need a quiet room. We that needs to be part of the event design. So there's definitely the ability for online and real life to blur or online and offline to blur because it's all real. I think it's important to not devalue your community based on the medium you find it through. And obviously, the internet is a very new tool in the community toolbox, but, people have done letter writing across continents for centuries. So,
Yeah,
that's true. What a gift Zoom and before that Skype have been to the neurodivergent community. Our prior generations didn't have this option. I've often been thinking, last year I was recovering from autistic burnout. So I was at home most of the time. And so really most of my interactions were through online communities. And I've had the thought so many times, what would I have done if Zoom didn't exist? I would have felt very, very isolated and maybe would have pushed myself to go into in-person communities, which would have then further hampered my recovery because it would have taken more energy than I had to get out. So yeah, feeling very grateful for the ways that technology has helped the autistic and neurodivergent experiences. And also Aradia, I just think it's so ironic that the technophobe community, and here you are, the most technologically adept of all of us. You're the one who's managing the podcast strings. And yeah, I'm just appreciating the challenge of that community, how that must have been for you. Thanks for sharing it.
I'm glad my parents were rebels.
Yeah.
But no, what you're saying about the burnout, I was just thinking too, like I would probably be in burnout right now if I had to stay in town in order to have access to people that I share affinity with, because town is too hot, too loud, too bright, and also was very bad for my spouse's respiratory health. So like we would both be in seriously worse physical health if we didn't have a solid internet connection to allow us to retreat to the woods.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And I just want to highlight a couple things that are really like jumping out at me right now. Like when you said, the big benefit of a community is that we remember that we're not alone and that there are people like me. And then in conjunction with what you said about burnout, it's like, I just think about other communities in my life that before we had these options, before we had these choices. And I think that's a big key word in my mind when it comes to community. Like I'm choosing to join an autistic community online. I'm choosing it because I know that I have choice and I have some autonomy in this. And I get to say, you know what? This is how many hours a week I want to devote to it. This is the environment that I need around me. This is the energy expenditure that I know it's going to take. In the past, that wasn't the case, right? Like I grew up in evangelical fundamentalism, and we were at church my entire childhood, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. For 4 years, I went to a school there, so I was there every single day of the week. And there was no choice in that. We all, I guess, believe the same thing. And this is the community that we have found ourselves in. But there was no equality in that community. There was only hierarchy. And there was no choice in like, oh my gosh, like sitting in this room with like 500 people for 3 hours is like really taxing my nervous system. Having a person at the front who's yelling at me for multiple hours at a time about how awful I am, like that is not the way I no longer define community that way. But that was my blueprint for understanding community. And when we left, I was about 16. It was like losing a limb. It was like I had found so much identity in that community. I had found so much of my understanding of self. That was where my friends were, right? We didn't have the option of having friends really outside of that bubble. And so I understood it as community, but really that's not how I would define community anymore, right? It was more of a prison than community. And, the way I define it now, community is a place to belong. It's a place to really know yourself. It's a place to learn more about yourself. It's a place where we can support each other. We can share joys. We can share challenges. We can be like, oh my gosh, congratulations. Like, I'm so glad that happened for you, right? Like celebrate each other. All of those things are part of community for me now. But one other thing that I think is really important in some of the in-person communities outside of that. So like, for example, when I was traveling and I was meeting people and maybe like doing some volunteer work or, just enjoying traveling together, or when I was doing post-secondary and getting degrees, those were communities of a sort as well. Those were perhaps short-term, like for a specific amount of time. But one of the big benefits of that for me was that I didn't have to worry about the spoon expenditure after the time was finished. I was allowed to have the experience, connect with people who had like similar interests and passions. And as soon as that trip, that, volunteer position or that degree was finished, we went our separate ways, right? We got the benefits from that community for the time. And then I was able to move on. And there's something about that, like object permanence, that a lot of us deal with. Like, once it's finished, it's finished. I'm really grateful for the experience. And then, we can move forward.
Cheryl, there's a couple of things you said that I really loved. First, I loved that you acknowledged that, even if a community is not a good fit, even if it's actively harming us, when we leave it, we still might feel grief from the change. Like you said, it's like losing a limb because it was so normal. So I think that's really worth acknowledging. And I love what you said about temporary communities too, and how they might not last forever, but what they are is enough and has a lot of value. I remember reading this email. There's a therapist named Nidra Taweb. I apologize if I say her name wrong, Tawweb. And she talked about how not all relationships have to last forever, and how she'd been to a weekend conference and she hung out with someone for the day and they didn't collect each other's emails or phone numbers after. It was just like, wow, it was great to have a friend for a day, and that was enough. And that's all it needed to be. I think there's right relationship, and we don't necessarily need to strain to make things last longer than their right relationship tends to be. I've also kind of been to these kind of conferences and things where everyone's like, oh, can I get your number? And in my head, I'm like, you're never going to call me. I'm never going to reach out to you. But I see that on the other side sometimes, people trying to make things last longer than the relationship kind of naturally wants to be. I love just acknowledging it's okay for short-term relationships to exist. It doesn't devalue them.
Yeah. I remember reading from years ago from Dan Savage being like, can we please stop saying that all relationships that end are bad relationships? And that was specifically in the context of romantic relationships because it's Dan Savage, but like that extends to all human relationships. Like, quantity is not a synonym for quality, right? You can have a really good relationship that ends positively and is fine and it's good and like it's fine.
And that's interesting that you say that, because for a lot of us that we've talked in this group, when you look at certain tendencies that maybe we've been taught are valuable, so like something like perseverance and sticking with something to the end, it's not really something that is always good for us. And it's also not something that necessarily comes naturally to us. And even more importantly, it takes a lot of energy when you're in a space where you're no longer really a good fit. And I think we have to start normalizing the fact that exactly what you guys both said, the length of time has nothing to do with the value of that time, right? I don't care, that even this, because this mentality has, spread into everything. Oh, you started a business, but then you realized it wasn't really for you and you're doing something else. Oh, fail. Oh, you're in that group, but you realize that, what? Being in 2 or 3 groups every week is just way too much energy. And you're now down to one. Oh no, like none of that is a problem. None of that is wrong, right? I would love to start normalizing the idea of whatever is in front of us, let it be for whatever it is meant to be. And if it continues, right? I mean, we've all known each other now for what? A year and a half, over a year. We're in the
Coming up on 2
I was
years,
gonna
I
say
think.
we're way longer than a year at this point. And none of us probably sat there the first day and said, ooh, we're gonna make this work and we're gonna, keep on going. It has, right? There's a lot of reasons for that, our shared interests, our shared passions, our shared journeys, our commitment to the collective, but it's been organic. It hasn't been forced. And, the best part about some of these communities that I'm in now is like, you show up and your presence is enough. And I think that's a big difference for me. Like in the past it was like, well, what do I need to do, right, to belong? And now just being here is enough. And then I just see like kind of what wants or needs to come out in any given time, whether that be support, a listening ear, some words of wisdom, a hilarious anecdote, whatever is needed. Hopefully it just flows.
Yeah. I was thinking too, like circling back to what you were talking about with the first community you were dealing with really not being good for you, and how That's such a normal human experience, right? That we're born into a community that doesn't work for us. Like so many people, their first community, their community of origin is not great. And yet, like, the reason that that's true is because humans have organized into communities forever for reasons of, self protection and self determination, whatever it is. And like, there's such a strong, like, in group, out group dynamic that is sort of baked in to that first thing. And like, what we're talking about with like awesome communities that you find online and you move in and out of is like such a soft, fluid, modern thing as opposed to like, we all gather together to defend ourselves and have food. And if you don't sing and dance the way that we do, then I don't know if we can afford to keep you around, right? Like that whole continuum exists. And communities have been really important for people being able to figure out how to build things and have medicine and stuff, right? Community builds that. And yet a lot of those communities also like punish people for not conforming, push them out, lock them up, like whatever it is. Exclusion is a big part of community, right? Like the in-group, out-group dynamic, like that's a thing. And I think that's part of why so many of us resist joining new communities after we've been burned 1, 2, 3 times. Maybe we don't seek community out anymore and we isolate. And then we wonder why we're depressed and miserable because it turns out the human animal needs community. Like physiologically, we need other people. But it's really hard when other people historically are a source of pain and trauma. So there are dark sides to community because if you desperately need community and your community does not desperately need you, where does that leave you?
Mm-hmm. And as much as we do need belonging, we can see that, since the dawn of time, we also do need authenticity. And when those two pieces are at odds, that can lead to a lot of internal distress for people. I know I've had the experience, right? And a lot of times we're making this decision before we even have the ability to have like conscious thoughts, right? I mean, we've all seen children, been around children, and like they're doing things to belong to the family. They don't, on a certain very subconscious level, like what to do in the different environments. Oh, if I do this, that's gonna get me in trouble. Oh, if I do this, that's gonna get me the silent treatment. Oh, if I do this, somebody's gonna get really upset with me. Like we figure it out really early on, right? The original community being our family and whatever extended groups you happen to belong to in those early years. And I do think that's like one of the lifelong struggles is I know I need to belong. I know I'm a social animal. I know not only just to belong and feel like I'm, that I matter and that, you're respected and loved and all of those important things, but also community can really bring that diversity piece in like, oh, this person's really good at this. I'm not good at that, but I'm good at this. And you start to like really see how you're contributing to a larger whole. But in those communities where you feel like you're sacrificing your authenticity, I think that is, I don't know, that's a tough situation that a lot of people have found themselves in. Do I stay here to belong or do I find something else so that I can be truer to myself?
Yeah. Thanks, Cheryl. Those are really important points about the need for authenticity and the need for belonging. And sometimes they clash and we're not able to get our needs met within community. That happened to me. And there was, a time between being in these communities where I didn't feel good anymore and finding communities that do feel good. And it's occurring to me that it was time spent by myself in wild places, generally hiking or camping. And, this discussion's really focused on human-based community. And I'm always the advocate for the more than human world. And I found a lot of community, just with trees, with getting to know the birds in my backyard. And if I miss a hike for a week, I legitimately feel lonely for certain trees and certain parts of a trail. And I found deep solace and clarity through having certain places I stop at on hikes and just sitting there for 15 minutes and building a relationship with a place. And it's a real balm to have these connections with plant life, animal life, with having a spiritual life. We do need connection, and connection isn't limited to human connection. And broadening my sense of what community can mean has really helped me to then find my way to more satisfying human connection as well.
Right, like, can you compete with my favorite cedar tree? Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, then you're in the
right.
circle.
Yes. If I would spend time with you when I could be just out by myself in nature, that means I really like you. And if I bring you on a hike with me, I must really like you.
I'm introducing my friends. Oh boy.
That's right.
I love this so much. I wasn't even thinking about my experiences in nature within this context, so I appreciate that, Patrice. You know, when I go hiking in the trails near my house, there is this one tree that I've always been drawn to, and I often stop and I chat and I always ask permission, like, is it okay if I, put my hands on your trunk? And like the wisdom and and I don't even care how woo it sounds. I just feel like there is ancient wisdom in nature, and we have access to it if we shut up and listen. And not even my ability to connect with the more than human community. I love that. Animals and trees and flowers, but also watching them in community with each other, right? Seeing how trees communicate and how they give life and how they just, oh my gosh, it's just amazing to see that web of connection, right? They're providing life for the birds, and then they're, as they decay, they're giving things back to the earth, and it's just this beautiful cycle. And just getting a model for community, even from what we see and experience in nature, is really beautiful, because it is, it's much more egalitarian. It's cyclical. There's not this hierarchy of, well, you belong here and you don't, and you have to do this in order to belong. Like, it's just anyone can come into the forest. We are all accepted. And also, and again, this sounds so corny, and I'm okay with that today. Just seeing like the diversity of nature. Like, I don't go into a forest and say, "Ooh, that tree is a little too large for me. Oh, that tree, oh, those branches, they could use look a little bit nicer before you present yourself to the world here, buddy." Like, we don't do that. We just accept every animal, every flower, every tree as it is. And that's another piece of community as well. Like, can you find a community where you are accepted as you are? And can you do the same for others in that community? Because that's a key piece of the autism community that I found, that in growing together and supporting each other and being in intentionally autistic spaces that are operating from a really neuroaffirming lens rather than a pathologizing one, I have come to accept myself. I have come to give myself more grace. And as I do that, I am much more likely to do that for others in community as well. And that piece of community, the ability to transform, my relationship with myself and others, I mean, that's a huge benefit that I don't think I even knew was on the table when I first started this journey.
Oh my God, that's so true. Because community, you say the community and you think other people, relation, or other entities, like relationship outside of self. But apparently I'm on a Dan Savage kick today. Another really helpful thing, quote I got from Dan Savage was that your first lover is yourself. And so that is the first sexual relationship that you will have. It will be very difficult for you to have a sexual relationship with anyone else without having had one with yourself first. And so same here with community. The community that you have with yourself and the, half of your body that's literally cells of microorganisms and et cetera, that matters. That actually really, really matters. And yeah, if your community isn't supporting you in being able to evolve your relationship with yourself and vice versa, like, that's something to look into and work on. Because yeah, if your community is not helping you feel more embodied and more yourself, it means if you are not helping you feel more embodied and more yourself, like, that's not ideal. That's really not ideal. I love all this talk about the nature thing too, because I feel very closely connected to nature even though I don't like going outside because the bugs are an exception to the rule of feeling one with nature. Bugs and I are not on good terms. But I love not just plants, but rocks and streams and like physical landscapes. I have a very flashy creek that I live next to, and seeing how it has changed over a given winter, going back down and being like, oh, that's a lot of erosion. That's a lot of disposition. Where did that one boulder go? Is like, it feels like I'm having a conversation with a landscape, but I'm talking to it. And it feels like socially beneficial to be in that, like, so that branch broke. I might need to trim that because it might get like infected. And, there's just this back and forth. And I had not thought of that as anything other than me being like a little animist woo person. But I like the idea of extending the proper definition of community into that thing that I do find so much value from.
I love that so much. Like, even the idea of water, right? I read something, I can't remember where, that autistic people especially are really often drawn to water. And perhaps that's because of part of our sensory experience. It also helps calm a lot of us when there's a lot of external sensory stuff going on. I know that when I lived for a short time by the ocean out on the East Coast, like, I felt in touch with myself, with all that is like the larger community. Like, and I really love that we're expanding the idea of community into the world we live in. Like, how are we, it's almost like, how are we relating? How are we connecting? What are we giving to that community? What are we receiving? Are we in balance? Are we in like that reciprocity? Or are we just taking, right? We can learn so much about how to show up, more fully, more authentically, more loving as we're in nature, as we realize we are nature, not just an observer, but like a part of it, literally. Like, I am not above the rocks and the squirrels. Like, I am on the same level as all of these beautiful beings. I'm just clearly in a woo woo day today, and I love it because it feels good to know that we're part of something. We're part of something larger, and we don't have to figure it all out. We can just be part of it.
Yeah. Cheryl, I really like what you're saying about being part of something larger. It's not just humanity that makes up our community, it's the entire ecosystem. It's all of it that we're part of. And, a lot of what I've learned about how to relate to the land comes from Indigenous people who I've studied with for certain amounts of time. And they are the most grounded, wise, sane, whole people I've ever met. And yeah, I've just felt like I want to be more like them. And so I listen to what they have to say. And there's something about the way colonialism and what came with it, industrialization, capitalism, like it alienates us from each other, from ourselves, where we're worshiping money and trying to get profit over anything else. And I think when we turn our focus towards connecting to ourselves, to each other, to the land, we heal some of that. So for me, community building in all these different ways, with self, with other, with the land, it's not just good and healthy. It's actually quite radical in bringing about a wholeness that we're lacking in the way that we're living and in the ways that we're hurting.
Yeah, that was one more thing I wanted to try to loop in somehow, and I didn't know quite how, and you just gave me the perfect loop in point.
Yes.
Because, here we've been, waxing rhapsodic about hanging out alone without other humans, just with trees and squirrels, and that's great, but that's, maybe off in the weeds. But in the human world, we have this tendency to make really catastrophic communities that just destroy the planet and make life miserable for all but like 7 people on top. And that's really, really emblematic in the white community, such as it is. The lack thereof, the fact that so many white populations are organized around very hierarchical and extractive religions or ethoses that are somehow not religious. Like, that's one of the big problems we have in the United States, is that the white population is like, I don't have a community. I just have my nasty little church. I just have my book club. I just, like, we're all separated. rejecting communities and what communities we have tend to be very, very hierarchical. And like it appeals to the human brain to be in a community at all. Like it's we are trained to prioritize hierarchy. It's something that works on the default settings, but it is clearly really destructive for our planet, for our society, like for our own physical health. And that's, we have to figure out how to take all this community stuff and apply it to our relationships with other people, right? Like be like, hey, can you be more like a cedar tree in my in my reality? Can I have a relationship with you like I do with that rock that I keep watching move downstream every year? Like, how do we bring this into our community with other people? Because like other people inevitably are going to look to us for part of their community. And we're pushing back against a lot of pretty terrible things. Like looking at community in this holistic, healthy way is, yeah, it's a return to something we cut ourselves off from centuries ago, right? As white people, like listening to our indigenous counterparts is like, oh, we are centuries worth of gapped from where you guys are. Like this is going to take generations of listening and working, and that's kind of daunting. And I love that you have relationship, Patrice, with indigenous people that are able to like share some of that with you and speed run a little of that gap, because like it's centuries deep. It's centuries of sundering, and how we put it back together is it's a process.
Well, I think part of that process is asking these questions and looking within and taking accountability. You know, one of my favorite quotes is, nobody's asking you as a white person to take responsibility for what has been done. People are asking you to take responsibility for the ways we still continue to benefit, right? And so
Yes.
let's remove this idea of, us versus them. We have got to start doing our own work as white people, recognizing that we've been taught a lot of shit, right? We've been taught so many philosophies that have its roots in colonization, right? Exerting power over the land, exerting power over other people because they don't look like me, right? We have all of it, even the way we sometimes phrase, well, my life purpose is, and then it becomes a very individualistic, way to complete that statement, right? This idea that individualism is what makes you strong and community makes you weak, right? Oh, needing other people, right? Like, who is going to rise to the top in this society? They're the ones that we need to emulate. Like, all of that is garbage. And it has not really helped anybody except, like you said, those few people at the top. So questioning what we've been taught is huge. Asking the hard questions is huge. Listening to people who do not look like you, centering those voices, whether that be on social media, listening to people, Black and brown creators, indigenous creators, and saying, oh, let me share your content because these are the voices that are giving us a perspective that we were never taught, right? Instead of speaking over people, listening. But yeah, that colonization piece that we see colonization so often in schools. I mean, I'm from Canada, so I can't speak for you guys, but this idea that colonization was a time period, that was then.
Yeah.
And not understanding that, whether it be patriarchy, whether it be, religious extremism, whether it be colonization, those are not time periods. Those are symptoms of a huge disconnect between ourselves and our own heart and spirit, disconnect between us and other people, disconnect between us and the land. And it's not like done. It's this mentality has carried over into the way we view so much. So, if listeners are thinking, like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Right? As we're joining communities, look at the structure and the nature of that community, right? Is there one leader who's telling everybody what to do and what to think? Is it more egalitarian? Does everyone have a chance to speak, like, and really be heard, right? Or are people getting talked over? Do you look around that community and say, wow, every single person looks like me? Those are some things that can kind of get you started, perhaps, on your journey of, is this a really healthy community? Is this a place where I can be authentic and really start to grow and connect with myself and others in a meaningful way? And again, of course, like depending on your intentions for that community in the first place, right? Are you joining that community because, you want support or because you want to share a special interest, right? There's going to be different reasons for different communities, of course. But some of these questions can still help.
Yeah, and I would add, thanks, Cheryl, noticing your concerns, noticing if you find yourself complaining about a community a lot and taking those concerns seriously. And I imagine many of us who are neurodivergent or come from more traumatic childhood backgrounds, our concerns weren't taken seriously. So it can become then a pattern. We don't take our own concerns seriously. We start complaining internally, but don't expect anything to change. If we start to notice, hey, I actually notice I'm complaining about this community a lot, even starting there could be revolutionary if you're not used to taking yourself seriously.
That's big. That's really big. And I love that because I actually noticed that happened once. I had been in a group and it was just too big. And I realized like I was feeling really uncomfortable. I couldn't really share what I wanted to share. I was feeling really overwhelmed with trying to process all of these different people's experiences and like hold space for everybody. And I'm like, but I normally like these spaces. I normally like these communities. Like, what's wrong with me? But I love what you said, Patrice. Like, it's okay to take your own inner guidance system seriously. In fact, we recommend it. Like, and be gentle with that because you're right. We often were kind of told, like, it's not a big deal. Like, you should be grateful that you even have this space at all. Or you should be, fill in the blank with you should. And I love that. Just, it's okay for me to not be a perfect fit for every group or community. It's okay if I need to take a step back. It's okay if, this just is not a good fit for me. It doesn't mean anybody did anything wrong, right? I think we would maybe remove the charge around like, oh, good and bad. More about, is it a fit for you? And you're the judge of that.
Right. Like returning to the nature analogy, like you're not going to expect fish to climb trees, right? Like, are you a fish or are you a tree? Like, because a tree is certainly not going to go swimming. That's just beyond ridiculous, right? Like, again, non-hierarchical. Who are you in this ecosystem, and does that need to change or not? And like, it's not a value judgment on you or the community. If it's a bad fit, it's simply that fish are not meant to be in trees. That's it's not a value judgment. It's just biology.
And the other thing too, maybe just to add in, like, while I do truly 100% believe that every single human needs community in some way, shape, or form, that community can look different for everyone. It can be, that one or two people in your support group, in your inner circle of like, close friends. That could be your community, right? For some people, it's their family. For some people, it's something maybe a community, passion that they get involved with, for some sort of activism. There's so many different varieties of community, and it's okay for you to pick the one that works for you and not feel like, oh, well, I have to get involved in everything, right? I'm a social creature, so I must be involved in multiple communities. Certainly, I thought of that at certain times of my life, like, oh, maybe I'm not involved enough. But you know what? We're allowed to experiment. We're allowed to play with this community idea. Like, we're allowed to try things, disregard them, and not think we failed because, oh, that didn't last very long. Right? Going back to that original point of quantity is not synonymous with quality.
Yeah. Well, do we have any final thoughts before I wrap us up and take us out? So there we have it. A friendly and autistic discussion around the human quest for community, which strayed into the unexpected territory of more than human community, and also how to ask the questions of if your community is actually serving your needs, and how you can better fit into it or remove yourself. As a reminder, we are all peer support coaches within the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, offering a variety of free and paid intentionally autistic spaces. You can learn more and follow us at our website, autisticcoaches.com. You can support us by sharing the podcast with your friends, peers, and anyone who lives with, works with, or supports or loves an autistic person. Thank you for listening to us talk about autistic stuff for autistic people. New episodes will come out on the second and fourth Mondays of the month. Until next time, find a community you are a part of and observe how your joy is sustained, or not, by that community. Autistic Stuff for Autistic People is a production of Fox and Draven Media. For more podcasts from Fox and Draven Media, visit our website, foxanddravenmedia.com.